Hi, friends. My name is Edie Penn, and welcome to my new podcast, PostScript. This podcast is about the scripts we inherit, the social contracts we internalize, and unspoken rules we live by, sometimes consciously, sometimes without realizing it, and how those things shape what we believe, what we tolerate, and how we move through the arenas of our lives. I'm coming to this conversation as someone who spent over 20 years in human resources. And while so much of what I've learned about these scripts and social constructs that we're slaves to is through that work, I know for sure that it applies to you as a regular, everyday person in your regular, everyday life. I've seen how breaking down these constructs has freed people. In many ways, what I've learned is that some of these normal ideas that we repeat at work and in our relationships, at leadership conferences, as parents, walking through our everyday lives, are actually really harmful scripts in disguise. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. One of the most harmful things about some of these frameworks is that they're presented like truth, not a perspective, not this might work for you if, truth. And the harm of that is, it doesn't even acknowledge that the assumption that this works for everyone is sometimes the very problem. Because if it doesn't apply to you, if you do all the things and your life doesn't suddenly improve, you start thinking that the problem is you, not the framework, not the message, certainly not the messenger, you. You start thinking that you're undisciplined. Maybe you're too broken or too sensitive, too resilient or not resilient enough, this or that, whatever, fill in the blank. When really, the framework was never built with you in mind. It was built for somebody with a different set of permissions, a different kind of body, a different relationship to relationships, to risk, to danger, to authority. And when you try to force those things onto your life, you end up worse than you were before. That's not self-help, friends. That's self-destruction. So the goal of this podcast and how I want you to engage with it is not to take what I say as gospel. God, that's the opposite of what I want you to do. It's to practice discernment. I want you to listen and ask yourself, does this idea make me feel more free or more restrained? Does it expand my thinking or shrink my options? Does it help me feel more like myself, or does it make me feel like I need to be someone else to be good or good enough? I also want you to pay attention to the voice behind that message. Whose perspective is that? What assumptions are they making about your life, your body, relationships, resources, safety, access, your reality? Does it even make sense to you? To be clear, this isn't about me. It's why this podcast will be audio only. Don't get it twisted though. I have a voice for radio and a face for TV. I just don't want you to become an Edie Penn fan. I mean, you can, because I'm fabulous. But the point is not worship. The point is practice. The point is that you get better at thinking for yourself so that you can take what's useful and leave the rest and build something that actually fits your life in community, and not just what sounds good, what's trending, what's on the New York Times bestseller list, what's packaged well, or the latest thing you saw on your IG feed. What's true, what's aligned, and what's for you. Enjoy the episode. Hi, friends. I'm so glad you all have joined me here today. I know I'm so late, but let's talk about why. In the last 45 days, I've moved both myself and my daughter to 2 new and different states from our 3-bedroom row home in Philly. While that has been mostly successful, I wildly underestimated how long it would take one person, me, to dismantle a house that large into 2 distinct collections of things. Especially given that a long-standing motto in our home has been, we share everything, it hasn't always been easy to determine who was getting what and or foresee what the total costs, mental, financial, emotional, of replacing that thing for the other person would be. For example, we wear the same size shoe. I know, it's amazing. And for a few pairs, who initially bought them had no bearing on who got to keep them. Moving has disrupted some assumptions I didn't even realize I was carrying. And now I've crawled inside and interrogated the question, what are the scripts I'm holding about the varied relationships between process and outcome? Relationship 1. Outcome determines the success or failure of the process. This script generally is that the success or failure of an outcome is dictated by the process. As an HR professional, in many ways, I have to live by this in my work. But the truth of the matter is, the only thing the outcome really tells us is what the outcome is. There's actually a culturally relevant and viral example of this. In April 2023, the Milwaukee Bucks were eliminated by the Miami Heat in the first round of the playoffs. In the press conference following that game, A reporter asked Giannis Antetokounmpo if he viewed the season as a failure. Giannis, clearly exasperated with this reporter, who apparently had asked the same question the year prior, responds, "Do you get a promotion every year? So every year you work, it's a failure, yes or no?" No. Every year you work towards a goal. It's not a failure, it's steps to success. Michael Jordan played 16 years, won 6 championships. The other 9 years, was it failure? Man, I'd never been a fan of Giannis, but I was after I saw this. I can't tell you how many times I've watched it. Because Giannis is right. What exactly is failure? And does the outcome actually dictate whether or not something has failed? I think the example makes it clear that the answer is no. But where in your life do you assume so? Relationship 2. Outcome determines meaning. Moving necessitated that my relationship to people, communities, and places in Philadelphia change. The distance between two things has become a factor. However, many of us believe that the distance means those relationships must not merely change, but also end. And for the first time in my life, I've asked myself, is that true? Does moving away mean that something must end? Does this outcome mean I've given up or walked away, or that I don't value the people and community and things that I love in Philly? Of course not. Do I get to keep agency over what my relationships to those people and things look like? Absolutely, I do. I can acknowledge that they can't be the same for any number of reasons, but I can also decide that I will commit to adjusting for the sake of remaining in community with any number of things I love that are now 161 miles away. And the people and communities on the other end, they get to do the same thing. They have agency too. Some things about the relationships will change in ways I don't like or couldn't predict. Some relationships may actually eventually end, but I don't have to decide in advance that distance means loss or that moving means I must leave everything behind for good. I get to participate in determining what comes next. Relationship 3. Outcome determines the value and or meaning of the process. Folks, we spend a lot of time devaluing a journey because we don't like the ending, and we lose so much in that approach. There are 2 great examples of life events in which we allow the outcome to have ridiculously outsized jurisdiction over the value and or meaning of the process: intimate relationships and when looking for a job. In intimate relationships, we often determine the success or failure of a relationship based on the duration of it. Married 30 years, success, it was worth it. Dating for 3 weeks, failure, it was a waste of time. When honestly, nothing could be further from the truth. In these instances, it's really the quality of the time spent. A relationship that lasts 30 years tells me that it lasted 30 years. I don't know if that was 30 magnificent years, 30 miserable years, or some complicated combination of the two and then some. A relationship ending after 3 weeks tells me it lasted 3 weeks. It doesn't tell me whether I learned something important about myself, experienced something wonderful or new, met someone who changed the way I think, or simply had a whirlwind of 3 amazing weeks. The ending doesn't get to travel back through time and erase or overwrite the experience that came before it. For job seekers, what happens when you apply for a job and hear nothing back, or you go through a whole process and you don't get the job? Does the not hearing back or the fact that you didn't get an offer tell you about the value or meaning of the process? Very often, I have to send disappointing notifications to candidates who quite frankly were amazing, because unfortunately, I can't hire everyone. And sometimes it's very slight differences between the candidates that lead one person to get an offer and another a deny letter. As a recruiter, it's a great problem to have. So when I can, because I can't always, I answer the question that's often posed to me in those disappointed responses to my deny letter. Edie, can you share any specifics around a decision to not offer the position to me? And it's hard because I often want to give encouragement to these candidates, especially when they're good, because I need them to know that not getting an offer is not a referendum on their skills, experience, or value. And side note, this is honestly one of the reasons I truly hate the practice many recruiters and HR professionals seem to have picked up to never notify the candidates that the position is closed or filled. Those people have been waiting a long time, in silence usually, to know if they're still in the running. And human brains abhor that kind of silence. We build stories and assumptions, and they never skew positive. They're like, they don't like me, or I'm not qualified, I'm not important, I don't have what it takes. When the fact is, for many of those applicants, a human hasn't even put eyeballs on your application. You might not have been rejected at all. You may simply not have been considered or considered yet. But from outside the process, those two things look and feel exactly the same. And this is the challenge of working backwards from the outcome. You know you haven't heard anything, and that's all you can surmise. You haven't heard anything. That's the outcome. You don't know what happened inside the process that produced that silence, but because our brains hate information in a vacuum, we fill it. We've gone from one fact to an entire story without acquiring a single piece of evidence to support it. So friends, now it's time for questions. Question 1. If the outcome doesn't tell us whether something succeeded or failed, how do we determine success? Listen, I understand the impetus behind this question, but I want to encourage you to first consider why you need to measure things in the binary of failure and success. I think Giannis's point is relevant here. He wasn't saying losing was secretly winning. They wanted to advance and they didn't. He's rejecting the leap from we did not achieve this particular objective to therefore this season was a failure. So even if you didn't get the outcome you wanted, i.e. advance to the next round in the playoffs, did you learn something you can apply to the next attempt that gets you closer to your goal? By the way, that could be what to do, what not to do, or anything in between. Question 2. How do you distinguish between choosing what an outcome means for you and simply refusing to accept an outcome you don't like? Guys, agency over meaning doesn't mean I shall interpret this however makes me happiest. That's not what we're doing. Reality still and always gets a vote. In my last episode, we talked about the script of meaning and how it is relational. So I think that could be instructive here. How has the outcome impacted your relationship to that thing? How has your relationship to the thing changed because of what happened? You don't have to like it. It only needs to inform you. Let outcomes inform meaning rather than dictating it. And finally, question 3. If we stop treating outcomes as the final measure of success, how do we keep ourselves from using the process mattered to rationalize poor results? Friends, why do we need to keep ourselves from using the process mattered to rationalize poor results? I think the issue here is if the process mattered and you learn something you can apply to the next attempt, this goes back to Giannis too, it steps to success. It gets us closer to the goal. I actually experienced this a lot when I was working in and with nonprofit education organizations and institutions. We did way too much. This didn't work because we didn't like the outcome, and not nearly enough debriefing to catalog and identify what about the process actually mattered. Maybe 80% of the intervention was extraordinarily effective and one little thing failed. Maybe the implementation was excellent, but an external variable out of our control overwhelmed it. Maybe the outcome measure itself was crappy and we could never have gotten an accurate answer using that ruler. The point isn't to rationalize an outcome we didn't want. It's to remain curious enough about the process to learn from it. And so, friends, that is the close of episode 7. We only have 3 short episodes left to this season 1 of my podcast, PostScript. I'm so glad that you've been on this journey with me and listening to me rant about all the scripts that I come across and interrogate for myself. I hope this has been helpful and instructive to you. In the meantime, lead with curiosity and practice interrogating what is true, what's aligned, and what's for you.